regularly scheduled program will not be seen tonight in order to bring you this Channel 6 special presentation. 50 Golden Years with Alec Gifford.
Let us pretend this is the year 1948, the year WDSU-TV signed on the air, when the streetcar named Desire was still riding the rails in New Orleans.
But this is 1998. The Desire streetcar is long gone, so we had to ask the RTA to provide one for us, which they kindly did, although we had to make our own sign. It also happens that in 1948, the play by Tennessee Williams, The Streetcar Named Desire, won the Pulitzer Prize. Well, what makes 1948 really important to us is that was the year that WDSU-TV signed on the air in the Hibernia Bank building on Carondelet Street.
In 1920, the steel skeleton of the Hibernia Tower rose over New Orleans. 28 years later, it became the first home of WDSU-TV, and one of our earliest employees, television director Paul Yasich, took us up to the Hibernia Tower to remember what it was like way back then in 1948.
This is the microwave receiver platforms that are still here. Now, none of these tall buildings were here at that time. Matter of fact, the Hibernia Bank used to be a landmark that was all by itself in the city. It brings back just wonderful memories of all the wonderful people I worked with at WDSU.
Happy birthday, happy birthday, happy birthday to you.
Yasich especially remembers this 10th anniversary broadcast on WDSU-TV, hosted by one of the wonderful people Yasich remembers, the late Mel Levitt. In that broadcast, Levitt talked about one of the problems they had to work with in that tiny studio atop the Hibernia Tower.
The studio was up in the Hibernia Bank building, and to get a long shot, the cameraman had to back out into the hall, up to, and on occasion, into the ladies' room.
Construction began almost immediately on the Royal Street studios that became the home of Channel 6 for almost 50 more years. We built those studios from scratch at 520 Royal, with Yasich as a pioneer, although at the time, he didn't think of himself as one.
The only time we realized we were pioneers is now, when people start talking about all the old guys in television. Then we say, hey, we must have been pioneers.
Of course, the real pioneering came years earlier, in 1923, with the founding of what later became WDSU Radio by the late Joseph Uhalt, the U of WDSU. This private home at 4521 Chestnut Street was the original studio of WDSU Radio. Joseph Uhalt's son, Hugh Uhalt, still has the old newspapers that came out in July of 1928, when the call letters WDSU were adopted and the studios had been moved to the top of what is now the Pavilion Hotel, then called the DeSoto Hotel.
Okay, this is the States item that appeared July 6, 1928.
And it wasn't just the front page. It seemed to be the entire newspaper welcoming WDSU. Hugh Uhalt even has a radio from the 1930s, complete with push buttons labeled with the call letters of WDSU and the other stations that later signed on the air. WDSU Radio got a television license in the late 1940s and was eventually purchased by Edgar B. Stern, Jr., the founder of WDSU-TV. Stern continued to operate the radio station as well as his new TV, but when he sold the station in 1973, the new owners did not buy the radio station, and eventually WDSU Radio was no more. Uhalt is sorry the radio station is gone, but
our good feelings are that the WDSU name and call signal is still alive with WDSU TV. And every time I look up at it, I know that the U in WDSU is for our last name.
And where is the man who bought that radio station and brought television to Louisiana? We caught up with Edgar B. Stern, Jr. and Mrs. Stern aboard their private jet, en route from their home on a little Pacific Coast island near Seattle to the snow-covered ski slopes near Salt Lake City, the resort he built from scratch and named Deer Valley.
Okay, let's go.
Indeed, that little dot coming down the mountain on skis is Edgar Stern himself, now in his late 70s, having recovered several years ago from open-heart surgery and a quadruple bypass. He built the Deer Valley Resort from raw land that had been owned by an abandoned mining company, turning it into the #1 luxury ski destination in America. He did it the same way he turned WDSU-TV into the #1 television station of its time. Catching up with Edgar Stern is no easy task. He was zipping up and down the ski slopes, and the only way to interview him was to set up our camera in the snow and wait for him to ski up to it.
Hard to believe this is the same man who pioneered television in Louisiana from 1948 until he sold the station in 1973. What a sight to see. New Orleans has got to think of Edgar B. Stern as the broadcaster, not as a skier. You're quite a skier.
It's more damn fun, I'll tell you.
He created Deer Valley with the same ideas he used to get WDSU TV going.
The thing was just to have very, very good people, very good announcers, very good newscasters, good reporters, and do everything well.
And that's the way he runs Deer Valley, with skilled hands at the control of what are called snowcats, turning those once bumpy ski slopes into the smoothest white carpets in America.
In his earlier life, it was broadcasting for this southern millionaire, New Orleans born and bred. But now he's a Westerner at home on the ski slopes of Utah. I get the impression that your heart is here more than New Orleans now.
Well, yeah, it's certainly here. I love to ski, and I love the mountains, and just sort of evolved that way.
Do you miss New Orleans?
Sure. Yeah, I miss my friends, and I do miss broadcasting, too. That was fun.
Soon the Sterns were back aboard their jet, en route to the Pacific Coast island home, where their hearts really are.
Good to be back, Mommy.
It's great to be back.
The grounds are magnificent, with seemingly endless pathways of exotic flowers, shrubs, and trees. Those paths lead to their favorite place of all, the little pier from which they go whale watching. New Orleans may have better old world charm, but there's probably no place on earth to compete with the world in which they now live. Whenever Stern goes out on that pier, he carries a camera to capture the wonder of the whales. He is especially proud of this shot of 4 whales breaking the surface of Puget Sound all at once. Polly and Edgar were married in 1947, the year before WDSU was founded. And they are not particularly happy with what's happened to TV over the past 50 years.
Well, we've gotten to the point where we just watch news shows, as a matter of fact, and football.
I get terribly disturbed about the amount of horror, the amount of guns, shooting. Just every night after every night, there's somebody shooting a machine gun.
The TV he created was extravagant, like this 10th anniversary broadcast in 1958.
Whenever I undertake something, I like to do it as well as I possibly can, and as creative as I possibly can. Why not do things that way?
He keeps a scrapbook to remind him of those bygone days that New Orleans can never forget.
Opening of WDSU. That was a big day.
One of Edgar Stern's first ideas was weather reporting. So he hired a young World War II meteorologist named Nash Roberts. His story in a moment as we continue with this special report on the first 50 years of Louisiana's first television station, WDSU TV.
Late in 1948, while determined engineers at WDSU were building Louisiana's first television station, educators were establishing the newest institution of higher learning, then Francis T. Nichols State College in Thibodaux. Through the years, Nichols State University student body has grown to more than 7,200 students from the U.S. and abroad. Nichols has distinguished itself by offering nationally accredited degree programs across its curriculum. WDSU honors Nichols State University on its 50th anniversary. Coca-Cola's urban revitalization campaign has had a positive impact on New Orleans, changing the outward appearances of many small neighborhood stores, and in turn giving business owners and those who live nearby renewed hope.
So this makes a lot of sense for the neighborhood and also for increasing my business with Coca-Cola.
Coca-Cola's efforts continue to be an important part of New Orleans. This Saving Our Streets message brought to you by Coca-Cola and Channel 6.
Urgent notice, this is the sale you've been waiting for, New Orleans. A1 Appliance has...
Or it becomes someone else's dream car.
This is the high-pressure system that dropped down behind
Roberts, the man who pioneered television weather reporting, broadcast on WDSU TV from 1948 until 1973. He became a meteorologist before World War II, about the same time he earned his pilot's license. Now the only thing this 80-year-old Nash Roberts pilots is a Honda three-wheeler, the only practical way to get around on his 200-acre ranch near Folsom and feed the 200 head of cattle he owns, breeds, and personally feeds. He calls the farm stress relief, this world of peacocks and tractors. When he's not feeding his livestock, He's in New Orleans at the office of his private weather forecasting service, a very stressful business.
When you do something like I did, forecast weather in the New Orleans area for a living, and everybody that knows the next day whether you were right or wrong, it's pretty stressful. And when I fool with the cattle, I forget all about the stresses.
WDSU pioneered television weather reporting in 1948 with occasional appearances by this TV greenhorn, determined not to be intimidated by the cameras.
To keep from being nervous, I just looked at the tally light and visualized myself talking to a friend, a guy that a person that I was perfectly comfortable with. And I adopted that kind of conversational approach, and it worked pretty well.
Now, Nash, when it finally comes time to lay down that microphone and walk away from that television camera, how do you hope this community remembers you?
Just as one of the regular guys.
And as a true television pioneer. And here's another genuine television pioneer, Dick Van Dyke, whose career really took off here at WDSU almost 50 years ago. In 1958, he returned to star in our 10th anniversary broadcast. And this is the Dick Van Dyke of today, on the set of his network TV series Diagnosis Murder, with him as Dr. Mark Sloan, and with his real-life son Barry playing his son on the show, Detective Steve Sloan. It is rare for Dick Van Dyke to grant interviews, but WDSU is a warm memory for this 70-something star, and he took a break from filming his TV series to walk down memory lane with this reporter, who arrived at WDSU on the very day he had left for the network. How in the world did you ever get to WDSU in the first place?
Well, Alec, I was in my middle 20s back then. I was working in Atlanta, Georgia, where my two sons were born, at a local television station there. And a very persuasive program director from WDSU happened to catch me when he was in town. And he did a sales talk on me and hired me to come to New Orleans for not a nickel more than I was making in Atlanta. That's how good a salesman he was.
What a promotion.
Yeah.
So what did you do for us?
Well, I came and, you know, the first night I got there, I had to do a little kind of a sample show showing what I could do. And they had some prospective sponsors sitting in the control room, Louisiana Coffee and a few guys like that. And they kind of liked what I did, so they bought some commercials. And I started doing a daily show, 4 o'clock for an hour, with nothing, just me to start with. And I think we probably had a little trio. And besides that, I pulled an 8-hour shift as a staff announcer. And I did some new news, and I had a couple of record shows and things like that. But the little hour we did on television kind of began to catch on, and we began to get some kids coming in as an audience. And it got to be kind of a thing. I really enjoyed it. And, you know, in those days, you didn't have much of anything. 2 live cameras, and you just, anything that came to your head, you did. We had no idea that we were pioneering anything. But I'll tell you, the people at WDSU were so nice to me. I'd never worked for a nicer group of people. It was a family down there. And I really enjoyed it.
Dick Van Dyke, still going strong with his Diagnosis Murder show. But it was news upon which WDSU built its reputation, from Hurricane Audrey in 1957 right through George last September. Our first news director was Bill Monroe, and we'll have his story when we continue with this special program on the first 50 years of Louisiana's first television station. Over the years, Bill Monroe brought numerous awards to WDSU, and for himself last April, an honorary degree from his alma mater, Tulane University.
I'm pleased to present for the degree of Doctor of Laws, Mr. William Clark Monroe, Jr.
When Bill Monroe got his first degree from Tulane in 1942, he minored in journalism, but journalism became the major of his lifetime. In 1955, he became the first news director of the fledgling WDSU TV, heading up a news department composed of just 3 people. By the time he left for NBC News in 1961, there were 40, and he had become the editorial voice of WDSU TV, one of the first in the nation to do TV editorials. At NBC, he headed up its Washington news operation, later spending 10 years as moderator of Meet the Press.
Our guest today on Meet the Press is George Bush, the new director of the Central Intelligence Agency.
Monroe earned that prestigious job after years as Washington editor of the Day Show, interviewing all the heavy hitters of the nation's capital, until, at the age of 65, he retired from NBC. Now, he's unretired, at age 77, working as ombudsman for Stars and Stripes, the military newspaper, traveling regularly to Germany and Japan, where these papers are published, making sure the military brass are not using the military papers to spin the news their way.
So it's a lot of fun to pursue this job. You go into the homes of these newspapers waving your First Amendment flag, saying it's just working the way it's supposed to work.
Is it working that way?
It is working that way.
The job is a natural for Monroe, who in the 1961 desegregation of the New Orleans public schools was the editorial voice of WDSU, the only editorial voice in the city to support federal Judge J. Skelly Wright, who had ordered the desegregation that finally took place that year.
Desegregation was the main threat to peace and order and the future of New Orleans, a thing people were worried about, so we started editorializing basically along the lines of the idea that the demagogues in New Orleans who were opposing desegregation were not going to be able to prevent it, not going to be able to run over the U.S. Supreme Court, not demonstrate in the street or throw rocks. That wasn't going to work. And eventually we had to accept whatever the Supreme Court said.
So where is Bill Monroe now? He and Libby, his wife of 57 years, live on 50 acres in northern Virginia, just outside of Washington, spending weekends walking across ancient bridges near a cabin they built 23 years ago, when they planted a tiny tree given to them by Judge J. Skelly Wright as a thank you for those editorials.
This tree is growing, putting out all kinds of new little shoots.
Although he and his children were born in New Orleans, Washington is now home for the rest of their lives.
Libby and I both love New Orleans, but at this point we have more friends in Washington than we do in New Orleans, and we have 3 of our 4 daughters who live right around Washington, so I think we're a little bit rooted in Washington.
He says he will finally retire in about 2 more years and settle down to write a book. On what subject, he is not sure.
Whatever he writes about, it should be quite a book. Probably few people in America know more about the occupants of the U.S. Capitol here than Bill Monroe. And if he decides to write about the birth of television in Louisiana 50 years ago, that should be quite a book, too.
If he writes about the early days of WDSU TV, he would be writing about the late Mel Levitt, the man in the tuxedo who hosted that 10th anniversary broadcast.
That was Louisiana's first television station, Juan, and I guess like all babies, it was small but loud.
The story of Mel Levitt, when we continue with this special program on the first 50 years of WDSU TV. The WDSU career of the late Mel Levitt began in 1949 as our first television sports director, later becoming special events director, responsible for all those firsts. First to cover the Mardi Gras parades, first to cover the Sugar Bowl, first to cover a congressional hearing. In 1993, in an interview for a program produced for the University of New Orleans, Mel Levitt recalled his very first day at WDSU TV when our studios were in the Hibernia Bank building.
They told me to report the work at the Hibernia Bank building. 14th floor, I think it was, so I went up to the 14th floor, walked down the corridor. I saw nothing that looked big enough to be a television studio, and then I saw television for the first time.
He was just 22 years old, working in New York for the Mutual Radio Network, when Edgar Stern met him and personally hired him. Mel had never worked in television, but he sure had a feel for it.
The thing about television was that you weren't presenting shows, you were experiencing something and sharing it with an audience. So what it meant, I guess, was that we did atrocious things by today's standards that were miracles at the time.
Mel Levitt died on August 8th of 1997, 2 months after his 70th birthday. Another early star of WDSU TV was the late Wayne Mack, best remembered in those early days as the Great Mac Nut, host of a children's puppet show.
I'd like to talk with you. How do you do?
Oh, I'm sorry, I can't talk to you right now. We're getting ready to start our big play.
The show was Little Red Riding Hood, and if Wayne Mack were alive today, this would not be one of his favorite memories. He had a brief movie career with the Three Stooges, along with other kid show hosts from around the country, playing outlaw Jesse James.
Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fastest good of all? Jesse James, you walk fast, you'll be smooth boys came out west. That's a lie!
It was the last movie made by the Three Stooges, and his last too, and he gave it his best. If you were to ask Wayne for a favorite memory, one would surely be his career as co-host with Terry Fletcherich of the long-running midday show.
interviewing the ladies who came in every day as a live studio audience.
Welcome to the program. And also welcome to the St. Cloud Heights Mothers Club today. Brought back by popular demand, they called us up and demanded that they be put back on the show.
What he'd most like to be remembered for was his assignment as play-by-play announcer for the New Orleans Saints. In 1973, he produced a special called 6 Years for the Saints, remembering their glorious start.
Our team had this town on fire, and the flames of enthusiasm fairly reached the sky when, on September the 17th, 1967, rookie John Gilliam gathered in the kickoff in our first official league game and flew like the wind, 94 yards to glory. Imagine, a franchise barely 12 seconds old and already in first place.
When WDSU was sold to new owners, Cosmos, in the early 70s, and they refused to assign him a cameraman for the Sugar Bowl, Wayne Mack typed up a 2-word letter to his new boss. It simply read, "I resign." He grew up in Pekin, Illinois, and this picture is from his high school graduation there, before the kid named Vernon McGlynn changed his name to Wayne Mack and decided to go into broadcasting. This brought him to New Orleans and a sports career that put him on a first-name basis with the likes of a young Arnold Palmer and a Chicago Bear named Dick Butkus.
But Wayne Mack's proudest achievement is this book, The Saga of the Saints, published in 1992, the year before his death.
The book is an unapologetic, admiring look at the Saints from their first days until the 1992 season. It sold over 10,000 copies. He loved to write and refused to take himself seriously.
You got to relax and have some fun. That's what the business is about. We're not all that important, really. We're just somebody doing a job.
Maybe so, but he sure regarded that book as more than just a job. It was his most important achievement, and it was his last. He died of cancer on April 1st of 1993. You're watching a special production of WDSU TV, dealing with the first 50 years of Louisiana's first television station. The program will continue in a moment.
Covering the news of the day has always been the force that has driven WDSU TV over the past 50 years. Our news coverage has won numerous awards for the station, and we trust won your confidence in Louisiana's first television station as a place to which you turn for authoritative news coverage. So let's turn back the clock to some of those major stories. The campus of Ole Miss in Oxford, Mississippi became a battleground in September of 1962. We have always taken our cameras wherever they needed to be to cover the news. And they were there throughout that long night when 2 people died in the riots that led to the admission of Ole Miss's first black student, James Meredith. We were in Little Rock, Arkansas, when President Eisenhower sent in federal troops to enforce school desegregation there. It's the kind of hard-hitting news coverage we have practiced over the last 50 years, winning numerous awards, including an Emmy for an undercover documentary on the Ku Klux Klan by reporter Bob Wagner, who was captured and beaten by them. As school integration was about to begin in New Orleans, and as mounting opposition threatened to disrupt our school system, we took our cameras to Prince Edward County in Virginia, to the little town of Front Royal, for an object lesson. The opposition there had led to a total shutdown of their school system. We took our cameras to Japan, New Orleans' leading world trade partner, and even beamed a live broadcast back to New Orleans.
Hello, New Orleans from Tokyo.
Every Saints fan knows the voice of Jerry Romig, the Superdome announcer. He took a sentimental journey home to our old studios on Royal Street, where he had spent almost 20 years as a news reporter and station executive in the early years after WDSU was founded by philanthropist Edgar B. Stern, Jr.
We had a staff, as you well know, that would go anywhere and try anything. Coverage of Baton Rouge in the legislature. It was unheard of, cameras going into Baton Rouge and going into the state capitol. We pioneered that, absolutely. It was unheard of. But, gosh, we've been through some days.
And here in the 90s, we continued traveling the world to cover the news. We followed a contingent of New Orleans Marines into Operation Desert Storm, and later to Bosnia with a group of Louisiana peacekeepers. And in January of this year, we traveled to Cuba with a group of New Orleans pilgrims to cover the visit of Pope John Paul II to the island.
We have taken all of those trophies we have won over the years, including this Emmy, and put them on display here in our new building at Howard and Barone. as a reminder of what we have done and been over the past 50 years as Louisiana's first television station, and what we plan to remain over the next 50 years, Louisiana's best television station.
Now, remember those pictures of federal troops in Little Rock, Arkansas? Today, we'd show it to you live in living color. But in 1957, it was not that easy for cameraman Mike Lalla, shooting black and white film, flying it back to New Orleans to the Pan American Film Laboratory.
You know, it's so easy to get our television news pictures these days with all this sophisticated electronic wizardry, our video and sound recording equipment, that it's hard to remember how difficult it was for this man, Mike Lalla, one of our original photographers at Channel 6. Almost 50 years ago, Mike, you had to do it all with one camera, didn't you?
What we call a Bell & Howell DR-70 then, Alec, and
a wind-up camera?
Wind-up camera, just like a clock.
And it gave you 2 minutes and 45 seconds of shooting time.
And this, right now, we think is rather primitive, but at that time, we thought it was really sophisticated.
And the film came out of that camera, went to this place, Pan American Film Lab, and that took another hour.
Before we got it back, and then we had to get back to the studio, because we had no processing at the studio at the time.
Lalla retired from WDSU in the early 80s to open the Old Nolans Cookery on Conti, now one of the city's more popular restaurants. From news photographer to restaurateur may be quite a stretch, but the fact is, the cookery is now known all over America. We met Mike at the cookery to talk about the stories he covered with his little wind-up black and white camera, like the Ole Miss riots that left 2 people dead as the university enrolled its first black student.
It was rather frightening, tear gas and everything else going on. It was rather exciting evening. I guess when you think about the adrenaline throwing, it was one of the most exciting stories I've ever covered.
Residents of the low-lying areas are...
And he remembers Hurricane Camille in 1969, which destroyed the Bay St. Louis Bridge, cutting off the Gulf Coast and leaving Lalla to come up with a creative way to get there and get the story.
Next morning, we got over to there. We couldn't cross the bridge, and I got a young man on a motorcycle to take me all the way into Gulfport because all the road was gone. So only Mr. Stern had great pride, personal pride in the station, and at that time, money was not a problem. You did what had to be done regardless of cost.
Do you miss the television business, Mike Lalla?
Occasionally, when there's a big storm coming, I sort of, in a way, say, thank God I'm not going, and in the other way, I sort of maybe wish I'd be there. But otherwise, not really. I'm quite satisfied at what I'm doing now.
But when we asked for a picture of himself for this story, this is the one he gave us. Mike Lalla is obviously proud of his role in helping us find the road we are still traveling today. On June 27th of 1957, we sent another early news photographer, M.J. Gauthier, to Cameron, Louisiana, to await the arrival of Hurricane Audrey, which killed 500 people, more than any other storm in modern Louisiana history. To Gauthier, it was just another assignment, until he got there and tried to set up his camera, barely able to stand up as Audrey moved in.
It was very windy, very, very windy. I had to really hold the camera because it was going to blow away.
We invited Gauthier to our news studios here at Howard and Barone to look at the pictures of the storms he had covered more than 40 years ago, and to let us see the pictures others took of him as he covered the news beginning in 1955, the year he joined WDSU, until he retired in 1985. He covered Hurricane Betsy, the 1965 storm that killed 68 people in New Orleans as high water flooded the area below the Industrial Canal. The only way to cover Betsy was by boat.
They were evacuating some people there. As you can see, this lady and little girl and her husband, I suppose. Just awful, you know, just see people stranded all over the place on houses and all over the place.
For the past 12 years, I have had the real honor of serving you as your mayor.
Chip Morrison was mayor of New Orleans in the 50s and 60s and died in the crash of a private plane in Mexico in 1964. WDSU was the only New Orleans station to send a reporting team to Mexico, M.J. Gauthier and this reporter. We both knew Morrison well and mourned with the rest of New Orleans at his funeral in Gallier Hall. And then there was Hurricane Camille, August 17, 1969. And he and Mike Lalla covered this storm, one of the most powerful in history, with a wind gust in Gulfport of 239 miles an hour. His experience was similar to that of Mike Lalla. Lalla had trouble getting in, Gauthier had trouble getting out.
So I got stranded around somewhere around Bay St. Louis or someplace. I didn't know where I was. There was water wherever you look, like being stranded in the middle of the ocean. Which way do you go, you know, without a compass?
The camera has taken M.J. Gauthier all over the world, from the choking ash of a volcano in Costa Rica to
to the Great Wall of China. Now, at age 78, he lives in retirement, still missing his lifelong career.
I think it was a good life. I enjoyed it very much, and I still think about it. And I still wish I would be doing it.
It's high noon in the Crescent City and time to...
High noon in New Orleans, and for some 20 years, that meant it was time for Midday with Terry Fletridge. Her story in a moment when we continue with a special program on the first 50 years of Louisiana's first television station. It's just about impossible to remember the early years of WDSU TV without recalling Midday and Terry Fletridge.
Hi, and may I wish you a perfectly beautiful day, another in a long string of lovely days.
For 20 years, New Orleans had lunch with Terry Fletridge. Before Midday, Terry was Mrs. Muffin, host of a children's show, a WDSU star from the first day we signed on the air. Terry returns to New Orleans from time to time, and when she does, it's time for hugs and kisses from old friends. A few years back, she returned for a reunion of the Midday crew in a WLAE telecast hosted by Jan Carr, another of the early WDSU stars. Terry brought along a box of Kleenex for this emotional reunion with Wayne Mack, who died a few years later, entertainment editor Al Shea, and meteorologist Nash Roberts, one of the first TV weathermen in America. Widowed and remarried, Terry Fletridge is now Terry Rowe, appearing for years on ABC's Good Morning America, reporting on senior citizens.
Special correspondent covering older Americans, Terry Rowe, is here with us this morning.
Terry now lives in the state of Maine and is in love with his legendary Rocky coastline, the area where the Cajuns first landed in America before heading for South Louisiana. And for a time, she lived on a little island, reachable only by boat. We caught up with her on a rainy morning at her island home.
Oh, this is the most unique little piece of Americana, isn't it? A Maine island.
Her memories go back to the very first week of WDSU TV to a series of live programs sponsored by D.H. Holmes, broadcast from the window of the Holmes Canal Street store.
And that was the first television that anybody saw. And I kind of feel like I'm the great-grandmother of television in New Orleans because I produced those first television programs.
She asked her sponsors for advice on how to do TV.
What do you do? I don't know. And he said, oh, it's radio with pictures. Famous last words.
But her proudest memories are the 20 years of Midday.
Midday was probably the first magazine program in America.
Terry is now an 80-something grandmother, a living legend from our earliest days.
I don't know who else is still around. I kind of feel like the last leaf on the tree.
We prefer to think of Terry as the first leaf on the tree, the first lady of Louisiana's first television station. The year is 1954. NBC had come to New Orleans for Mardi Gras. WDSU provided the cameras, and NBC's Merrill Muller provided the commentary.
Get a load of that crowd in St. Charles Street. St. Charles Avenue, one of the finest and most beautiful in the city, and this is a city of beautiful avenues and beautiful homes. St. Charles Avenue is absolutely packed all the way from Lee Circle out as far as I can see behind me here.
NBC had never seen anything like this before, and neither had America, except for those who had visited New Orleans.
There goes the ladder now.
In those days, we didn't have all the sophisticated equipment we now take for granted. Director Paul Yosich remembers that he couldn't even communicate with his cameramen on the street.
But my cameraman knew what shot I wanted, and I couldn't tell them anything, so I waited for them to get a shot, and I'd punch it up.
Yosich remembers what it was like in those early days, and what a treat WDSU was giving its viewers. And our live coverage did not end on the street. WDSU had live cameras inside the Municipal Auditorium to give the nation its first ever look at the elite world of carnival royalty at the Rex Ball and the meeting of the courts of Rex and Combs.
Gaines Batson, our announcer, who was with WDSU in radio, moved over into television, was the narrator, and he had a very stiff, old-time announcer voice. He would say, "Now the Queen of Rex joins the King," and the same words were used every year.
And now we see the King and Queen rising as Phoebe Williams and Leon Irwin, Jr. There's the scepter gesture for everyone, and everybody in the ballroom is now clapping. The Queen's mantle, which you can get a look at, is 7 yards long and weighs 40 pounds.
Rex that year was Leon Irwin, Jr., a prominent insurance executive, and his queen was a lovely ballet dancer, Phoebe Williams.
This particular queen, Phoebe Williams, is studying at the Metropolitan Opera Ballet School in New York. And that is what she wants to be, a ballet dancer. But tonight, she is a queen. And the queen, despite her ballet studying, is a real Southern belle. Make no mistake about it. I have no hobbies except a little sewing, she told me. And I don't know how to drive a car. I asked her if she could cook. I can, she said, but I don't.
Leon Irwin is now retired, and his queen passed away some years ago. But this was their night, reigning supreme all those years ago. And who knows what the viewers of America thought of this strange ritual we call Mardi Gras. But Mardi Gras is our day here at Channel 6, and we have never missed it.
This is a wonderful, gay, charming evening tonight. In the olden days of Mardi Gras, Rex used to go to Comus Ball to steal a queen. Later in 1880...
We have also never missed the changing of the guard at City Hall. This is 1974, Moon Landrieu being sworn in for his second term as mayor.
Today is the first day of the rest of our lives.
Former newspaperwoman Iris Kelso covered the story for Channel 6.
Iris Kelso with cameraman Bob Perrin, Newswatch 6.
WDSU turned its sights on newspaper people like Iris Kelso for its early reporting staff. She was a 20-something right out of college when she went to work for the newspaper. In 1967, she signed on for 11 years with WDSU TV. Later, she returned to the Picayune, from which she is now retired.
Hello.
Other than news, Iris Kelso loves the garden of her uptown home, even in these winter months. It's the view she sees from her computer keyboard, where she is assembling her memoirs for a book. Memories of 1959, when she staked out a Covington motel where Governor Earl Long was hiding out.
We sat outside and watched things, people come and go. One day we saw Blaze Starr, the strip teaser that he was probably having an affair with, come and go.
Iris Kelso. She gave WDSU TV 11 of its 50 years, helping us become what we are today, Louisiana's most authoritative news voice.
Good evening, my dear friends of science, students, and of course, those of the higher order.
And how can we remember our 50 years without remembering Morgus the Magnificent? Who was Morgus, and what's he up to now? We'll answer that question when we continue with this special report on the golden anniversary of WDSU TV.
Good evening. Welcome to Morgus.
The Morgus shows are still on TV, 52 of them still existing as reruns, most of them having been taped and shown on Channel 6. In one memorable episode, Morgus encounters the late Wayne Mack, coming into his do-it-yourself clinic with a bad case of bad breath.
I have halitosis. Yes, look. Woo. Don't say anything with the letter H, okay?
Morgus decides to operate, assisted by the lumbering Chopsley, played by the late Tommy George. But the man who created Morgus, Sid Noel, is very much alive and well, telling us who and what Morgus was.
Morgus is governed by a select group of august body of intellectuals from outer space, supposedly, that came down and built the Great Pyramid and passed on all this knowledge for generations through the Morgus family, and he is now ready to take over the world. Morgus comes off of Don Quixote, because Morgus is Don Quixote. He was my favorite character in literature. And Chopsley is Sancho Panza, the great idealist trying to help the world, bring it to a higher order. So there's some depth in what we were trying to do here.
But now, Sid Noel has a new and very serious endeavor.
This is my program now. It's called Uncle Noel's Fun Fables.
He wrote 24 short stories, fashioned after the Aesop fables, to be heard by students from kindergarten through 5th grade, designed to steer young minds away from crime and drugs. It's his new mission in life.
There's been a wake-up call lately, as we know. You read the paper every day with teenagers killing teenagers and suicides and whatever. We know that there's a wake-up call, and we also know that, unfortunately, nobody's waking up.
So this is what life is like these days for Morgus, the creation of Sid Noel. Remember those Tarzan movies? If you do, and you'll remember Sam Adams, the zany genius who hosted this Saturday staple of the early days of WDSU TV. Sam Adams at the piano, a gorilla at his side, calling viewers to identify the parody song like Oh Johnny, or Tarzan star Johnny Weissmuller.
Oh, Johnny Weissmuller. How can I make it more succinct or easy than that? Are you listening, Miss Moran?
Yeah.
What's the name of the song?
Oh, Johnny, oh...
I can't confuse you. There she is.
Nothing was scripted. It was all live, spontaneous, zany, slapstick, and above all, creative. Like the man in the leopard skin costume who landed on the piano.
And he came right in on that rope and fell right here, and I heard what you would call a Steinway crack.
A few months ago, Sam Adams came back for a visit to our new studios to find that same piano he had played on Royal Street.
It is.
It is?
It is. The same. I treated that Steinway in an unkind way.
And with that, he headed right back to that old piano. Sam Adams, the creator of parody songs, who had composed one just for our 50th anniversary year.
Well, the year was 1948. Television like a collision hit our state. Eyes were fixed on just Channel 6.
Sam Adams, one of the memories of our first 50 years.
That's Channel 6.
So here we are atop the Hibernia Tower, where WDSU TV's first studios were located. This is where it all began. So many memories, so little time to talk about it all. About people like Marie Matthews, one of the original occupants of our WDSU television kitchen. About the time we took all of our equipment to the island of Bimini in the Bahamas to send back a live broadcast to the U.S., the first time that had ever been done. About the WDSU caravans to places like Thibodeau, where more than 100,000 people turned out to greet these early pioneers of WDSU TV. These first 50 years have sure been memorable ones. If we do half as well over the next 50 years, we'll be quite a success. This is Allie Gifford saying so long for now from atop the Hibernia Tower.